I'll talk really loud. Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for coming on this beautiful day. My name is Linan Polite, and I'm the gallery director here at Vashon Center for the Arts. Let's see, a couple announcements. First of all, these talks are made possible by our sponsors, the generous support of Tom and Ida Gay Nicolino and Ellen Kritzman. So we always like to thank them for that. Also, a reminder that all the talks are free to youth under 18 and also teachers who can receive continuing ed. The gallery shows today is their last day, so be sure to take a view if you didn't before the talks. It's International Women's History Month, and so we have all women. We have a collection of 15 glass artists in the gallery, some of the most preeminent in the Pacific Northwest. Tahina is from Port Townsend. She has her fiber art on the big wall, and Stephanie Benson has jewelry in the shop. And then two other things about our next couple talks. One, the next one is Wednesday, April 16th. It's a Wednesday night, so it's at 7:30, and it's Bruce Morser, who will be exhibiting a retrospective show in the gallery called 8,000 Pencils, 45 Years and 6 Careers. So come and see his talk. It's always guaranteed to be entertaining. And then Rebecca is coming back May 17th for a talk about Ai Weiwei, who is currently exhibiting, I see a lot of nodding heads in the audience. So even if you've seen it, come see her talk and then go see it again, because it's huge. So she's going to be giving that talk in May. So that's what's coming up. In the meantime, we're going to listen about Frida Kahlo. Thanks, Rebecca.
And May 17th is a Saturday. It's a slight change up from our usual Sunday afternoon, just so that nobody gets here on the wrong day. That would be very sad. Frida Kahlo has become one of the most famous and recognizable artists of the 20th century. This despite the fact that she worked for many years in obscurity, greatly overshadowed by the fame of her husband. And yet she has become a feminist icon, someone who has provided inspiration for legions of women all over the world. Now, Frida, in 1936, painted her own family tree. In this image, my grandparents, my parents, and I, in which she shows herself here as a baby in the courtyard of the Blue House, which is still a Frida Kahlo museum today. Her parents are right above her, and in her mother's womb is her baby sister, Christina, born just 10 months after Frida. Now, on the left side, we see her mother's parents, her grandfather in particular, who had native heritage. On the right, over the ocean, we see her father's German parents. So their position suggesting their European descent. And with this image, she ties everyone together with ribbons that look like blood. So blood, arteries, metaphors involving the female body are always important to Kahlo's work. Now, Frida Kahlo first encountered her husband-to-be, Diego Rivera, when he was painting his very first mural on Mexican soil in 1922 and 23 at her school. She was a student at the National Preparatory School. She was a good student and was aiming for a career as a physician. And Rivera had recently returned from Europe and had been hired by the progressive government to paint this mural to promote the ideals of the new Mexican government post-revolution. In fact, although Frida was born in 1907, she liked to say that she was born in 1910, the year that the Mexican Revolution began, that she came into being at the same time as the revolution. So she, from an early age, had begun amending and, she thought, improving her own biography. And she horrified her school friends at the age of 15 by telling them that she was going to have Diego Rivera's baby. A couple of years later, Frida was involved in a horrific accident. And this was not uncommon in Mexico City at the time. She was riding public transportation and a streetcar collided with a bus. The handrail of the streetcar pierced her pelvis. She said she lost her virginity to it. One of her legs was broken in 11 places. Her spine was fractured in 3 places. Her right foot, was crushed. In fact, she was left for dead by the medics who were triaging the scene and did not think that she was savable. And her boyfriend had to encourage them to help her because he thought that she could make it, as of course she did. She made this drawing about a year later, but she post-dated it. She was always post-dating things. She had lost, in elementary school, she had lost a year of school to the consequences of polio. So that right leg that was damaged was already damaged by polio, and then it was nearly destroyed in this horrible accident. And as a result, she spent most of the following year in the hospital. And her father, who was an artist, but primarily a photographer, rigged up an easel that was suspended from the ceiling so that she could paint while lying on her back in traction with her injuries. And it was at this point that painting became a means for her to distract herself from her physical pain. And this was when she changed her life's ambition from that of being a doctor to that of being an artist. So this self-portrait was painted in the hospital. And she would paint her boyfriend, the one who persuaded the medical staff to pick her up off the ground and take her to the hospital, Miguel Lira. Now, Kahlo is almost entirely self-taught as an artist, but you can see in this 1927 portrait of Lira that she is aware of European artistic tendencies, of Russian constructivism, her use of text, of cubism. So she is reading art books and art journals. She is following what is going on in the art world, and she's interpreting it in her own unique way. In 1929, she had already begun to be close to Diego Rivera. She and Rivera met in communist circles, perhaps introduced by Italian-born photographer Tina Modotti, who photographs them here. Now, part of the reason that her friends were horrified when she said she wanted to have Rivera's baby is that he was not an attractive man. He is enormous. And Frida was quite petite. But he was also this magnetic personality. And she was drawn to him from a very young age. In fact, in 1928, when she was 21 and Diego was 41, he painted her in the center of one of his frescoes in the Ministry of Education, the arsenal or the distribution of arms, where Tina Modotti, his most recent lover, is over here on the side talking to her new flame. And there in the center is Frida with a red star on her breast. It's said that when Diego's agent, his dealer in New York City, saw the photographs of these works, he immediately said, "Ooh, Diego has a new girl." And he was correct, and they would marry in August of 1929, when she was 22, although posing as 19, and he was 42, so nearly twice her age. She depicted their union in this marriage portrait that she made a couple of years later. And you can see she sort of slims Diego down and makes him a little more handsome in this image. But she is tiny. Look at her feet compared to his feet. And Frida here depicts herself, although she is making this image, she depicts herself not as the artist, not as holding the palette or the brushes that she gives Diego, but as holding his hand, as serving as his muse and helpmeet. They would honeymoon in Cuernavaca, where Diego was painting a series of frescoes in the Palace of Cortez, paid for by the American ambassador to Mexico, Dwight D. Morrow, as a gift to the Mexican people. And while they were there, Diego made this lithograph, or actually this is the sketch for a lithograph that he made of Frida, which is the only nude he ever did of her. Unlike many of his previous mistresses who served as physical muses for him, whom he frequently depicted naked, this is the only one of Frida, and it's a really interesting image. Rivera knew that Frida was self-conscious about her right leg, about the fact that it was, significantly shorter than her left leg. And so here he depicts her, in, go back. What have I done? No. Okay, maybe. Come on. There we go. So he depicts her wearing just about nothing except for high-heeled shoes. We see the garter marks, and she's taken off her garters, but she's either putting on or taking off pre-Columbian beads that Diego gave her, that he collected, these pre-Columbian objects. And he would encourage her to adopt the dress of the women of the Tehuantepec Isthmus, a part of Mexico that he was sent to by the Minister of Culture after painting that fresco in Frida's high school, because the minister felt that it wasn't Mexican enough. And so after spending years in Europe, Diego needed to be reintroduced to Mexicanidad. But he was very struck by the Tehuana women, by these native women, their colorful costumes, and the fact that it was a matriarchal culture. And so he encourages Frida to adopt these long skirts that would cover the leg that she was so sensitive about. And he had real disdain for Mexican women who were slaves to the French fashion industry. He felt that they should be more individual than that. And so Frida adopts the long Tehuana skirts. For this photograph by Imogen Cunningham, she wears a rebozo, which was associated with the women of the Mexican Revolution. She wears a pre-Columbian necklace and Spanish colonial era silver earrings. And it is all very carefully curated. Frida would create her own image just as carefully as she crafted any of her canvases. Frida and Diego hired their friend, architect Juan O'Horman, to build the very first example of modernist architecture to be erected in all of Mexico, their house and studio in Mexico City. But while it was under construction, Diego was evicted from the Communist Party of Mexico. They were upset that he had taken that commission from arch-capitalist Dwight Morrow, the American ambassador, among other things. And so it seemed politically expedient at that time for Diego to fulfill some commissions that were waiting for him north of the border. And he and Frida would travel first to San Francisco, where she was photographed by Cunningham, and then they would travel to New York and be feted by the art world there, as Diego had the second one-man show at the new Museum of Modern Art in New York City. The first went to Matisse. So that gives you an idea of Diego's stature in the art world in these years. And then they traveled to Detroit, where Diego was spending a great deal of time at the Ford factory. And you can see the letters F-O-R-D on those smokestacks that are belching out smoke, in which is projected the American flag. And Kahlo paints herself on the metaphorical border between the US and Mexico. She paints herself in a pink party dress because she was having to attend parties with the Detroit society ladies. But she wrote, quote, "It is terrifying to see the rich having parties night and day while thousands of people are dying of hunger. Although I am interested in all the industrial and mechanical developments of the United States, I find that Americans completely lack sensibility and good taste. The houses look like bread ovens, and all the comfort they talk about is a myth," end quote. Well, she's not actually interested in those industrial developments. That was Diego's obsession. And you can see that in her split, she puts all of the mechanical things on the American side of the border. The smokestacks, the skyscrapers, these weird exhaust things, all of these appliances with their cords snaking down into the soil Whereas on the Mexican side, you find actual growing things, plants, and both the sun and the moon are on the Mexico side. And these ancient ruins of thousands of years of pre-Columbian culture, all on the Mexican side. Frida transgressively holds a cigarette in one hand and a Mexican flag in the other. These were the months in which Diego was painting his finest murals, those in the Detroit Institute of Arts, that were lambasted by the conservative press of Detroit, but defended by the auto workers that Rivera depicted in his magnificent scenes of the assembly line in the Ford plant. But while Rivera is working on these murals, Kahlo had a miscarriage and recovered at Henry Ford Hospital, where she depicts herself. Diego had to sneak her art supplies because her doctors felt that that would be upsetting for her, and he snuck her a medical textbook so that she could make this image of the fetus that she was certain had been male. So she shows herself here as a tiny, almost doll-like figure, lying in a pool of her own blood on this oversized hospital bed, and surrounded by symbols of her miscarriage. The orchid from the bouquet that Diego brought her in the hospital, a snail because it all happened so slowly, her ruined pelvis, and this weird mechanical thing that is a symbol of her pelvis, all with, all on this barren ground with the Ford plant on the horizon line where Diego was spending so much of his time. And she ties each of those symbolic objects with a red string that again looks like an artery, and they all join at her midsection. So this is her way of now using her painting to work through the emotional pain of her miscarriage. Diego encouraged her, and he encouraged her to paint on tin in the style of the anonymous ex voto painters of Mexico. He and Kahlo collected these folk art paintings, which were left at shrines, in churches, on altars, as thank yous for grace received. Or sometimes if you wanted something, you would have an ex voto made. And this one, this blank area at the bottom that has writing, it describes the date at which the person paying for this painting prayed to Christ crucified to deliver her from typhoid fever. And she recovered, and so she left this ex voto. And so a little later, Frida would paint My Birth, which is a tough painting to look at. It is painted on tin, and she has the scroll at the bottom, but it is blank. And she painted this, she said later, after hearing the news of her mother's death. The Virgin of Sorrows presides over the head of the bed, and she wrote to a friend, quote, "My head is covered, because coincidentally with the painting of this picture, my mother died, end quote. My head is covered, although the infant that is, leaving the womb has Frida's conjoined eyebrows. And it is maybe a Freudian slip, but it's a very telling one. She would describe herself as the woman who gave birth to herself. She was never that close to her pious mother, although she was devastated when her mother died while she was in a foreign country. And so this work has almost no antecedents in the history of Western art, but it does draw on this sculpture, which at the time in the 30s was believed to be Aztec. It's now thought to be a 19th century forgery, but it is an image of a woman mid-childbirth, something that is almost absent from the Western art history tradition. The following year, still in the United States, Kahlo painted "My Dress Hangs There." Her dress, in fact, hangs between a trophy and a toilet. And it's that characteristic Tehuana dress, but she's clearly in New York. We can see the Statue of Liberty in the background and Manhattan. And they had gone for yet another very prestigious commission in the Rockefeller Center in New York City in the Radio Corporation Arts Building, where Rivera was commissioned to paint man at the crossroads, looking with hope and high vision to the choosing of a new and better future. A painting that involves rows of workers, but also soldiers in gas masks. And if you look closely at Kahlo's work here, you'll see it's one of her very few collages, and that she has collaged in bread lines and workers striking and labor unrest in this scene of Depression-era New York. So she is acutely aware of the suffering going on all around her. So Rivera would also paint a labor leader. That was what he described in his proposal to John D. Rockefeller Jr., his patron for this work. But when he painted it on the wall in the Radio Corporation Arts Building, it was recognizably a portrait of Lenin. And Rockefeller asked him to please alter that back into a generic labor leader. And Rivera said that that would harm his artistic integrity, and he would rather scrape the whole thing off the wall than alter his vision 1 millimeter. So the Rockefellers obliged, pulled everyone off of the mural project, and destroyed it, and had another artist do a very inoffensive mural in its place. Rivera used the proceeds that they gave him to recreate the mural on a wall in Mexico City, but he felt like he was being sent home in disgrace. And whom did he blame but Frida? Because Frida had been so unhappy in America, so far from her mother in her last illness and so forth. So Rivera did the most hurtful thing he could. He started having an affair with Kahlo's younger sister, Christina. Christina was a divorced mother of two and was, in a way, everything Frida wasn't. She was curvy, she was bubbly, she was fertile. And this was so painful to Kahlo that in response, she painted this work that she called A Few Small Nips. Now, it is inspired by a newspaper article that she read about a man who had stabbed his girlfriend 20 times and then complained to the judge, but I only gave her a few small nips. Unos cuantos piquetitos, as it says right up here. The woman has Frida's conjoined eyebrows. There's blood everywhere, including on the frame. And the man looks somewhat like a very skinny Diego. But I want to point out that this was photographed with Frida nearly a decade later, at which point the frame is normal. And at some later insult on the part of Diego, some new, fresh heartbreak, she went back in with her red paint and altered the frame sometime after December of 1944. Frida retaliated. She started having her own affairs, including one with Leon Trotsky, who was in exile in Mexico and had taken refuge in the Kahlo household and was originally looking to Christina for some extramarital entertainment. And Frida signaled that no, rather she was the one who would be more amenable. And after Rivera found out about their affair, he kicked the Trotskys out of their compound, and not much after that, Trotsky was successfully assassinated. There was an attempt while the Trotskys were living with the Riveras. But she dedicated this self-portrait to Trotsky during their affair. She had more miscarriages. And eventually her doctors would tell her that because of her internal injuries subsequent to that accident as a teenager, that she would never be able to bear children. That long-held desire of hers. So she would also have abortions as well. My Nurse and I, was painted after another miscarriage. And again, it is Kahlo working through her grief, depicting herself as an infant with a curiously mature head, suckling from her midwife, or not midwife, her wet nurse, because her sister was conceived so soon after her birth. Her mother did not nurse Frida, but rather had a native woman act as a wet nurse. And Frida couldn't remember what she looked like. So she paints her face as a pre-Columbian mask. But she remembered that the woman called rain, that the goddess's milk, pouring down on us all from the heavens. So this is an image of consolation. Because she could not have children of her own, Kahlo had a series of substitutes. She surrounded herself with dolls and dogs and monkeys and parrots and other stand-ins for those children that she would never have. And in this painting, Self-Portrait with a Bed, she paints herself and her doll. You'll notice that she paints herself quite dark in skin tone and the doll very, very white. Very unreachable in a way. There were also children around her whom she painted. In this case, the child was the 3-year-old son of a native woman who was one of Rivera's models. And Diego was the godfather to this child, who died at 3 years old. And it had been a custom to paint deceased children going back to colonial times. And so Kahlo paints this child as if he is royalty, with a crown, surrounded by flowers in honor of the dead. It's a very moving painting, and one that acknowledges the reality of infant mortality and, frankly, maternal mortality in Mexico in the 1930s. She would also paint this live girl with a death mask. She plays alone, a mask associated with Day of the Dead festivities, but it is a very eerie image. Even when Kahlo was painting the sort of thing that we think of as neutral, like a still life, it has a real emotional charge. So in that same year, 1938, Kahlo painted prickly pear fruit, tunas in Spanish, and she paints 3 of them. One of them immature, one of them just about ripe, and one overly ripe. So ripe that touching it means getting stains of red on the plate and on the sheets. So this is no Cézannean exercise in the cube, the cylinder, and the sphere. This is a still life that is as much about heartache as her images of, the murdered woman or her own suffering. Her Fruits of the Earth depicts the sorts of produce items that she did not see in the United States. More prickly pears, these unpeeled, funguses, native forms of maize, things that were native to Mexico that she knew would look strange to a non-Mexican audience, even threatening, like the stormy sky in the background. In that same year, Kahlo painted her most surrealist work, What the Water Gave Me. And Kahlo would always insist that she was not a surrealist, she was a realist. But in this painting, she paints her own damaged foot. This is an image of herself in the bathtub, what she can see. But she imagines a volcano that is erupting a skyscraper, a dead bird, more of that prickly native Mexican foliage and fruit stuffs, worms and insects and tiny dancers crawling along this string that is binding the neck of this long-haired woman. And here, floating on a sponge, two female lovers just below her own parents. And in fact, this was the year that the head of the Surrealists, André Breton, visited Mexico and saw Kahlo's work and was astonished by it. He said that it was like a ribbon wrapped around a bomb. He felt that she was a surrealist avant la lettre, a surrealist who developed surrealism without the intellectual structure that the European surrealists had. Now, Kahlo was bisexual. She had affairs with both men and women fairly openly, and here depicts a lesbian couple, two nudes in the forest, against this rather threatening backdrop of enormous and weird foliage, and more of those spidery roots reaching down into the soil. Now, in 1938, Kahlo had her first show in New York City at a gallery. And from New York, she would go on to Paris and show in Paris in an international surrealist show, where she would meet the surrealists and think that they were completely useless because all they did was sit around talking about theory. None of them did a lick of work, and there was no food in the larder. Whereas she was used to herself and Diego, who were constantly working. But while she was in New York, a friend of hers committed suicide. And the mother of Dorothy Hale commissioned Kahlo to paint a no, I'm sorry, it was another friend. It wasn't the mother. A mutual friend commissioned Kahlo to paint a remembrance of their friend that this woman was going to give to the mother as a gift. To her horror, Kahlo painted Hale's suicide. She threw herself off the upper roof or balcony of a high-rise in New York City, and we see that in action, and we see the mangled body lying in a pool of blood. This was not exactly what was going to make a good gift for Dorothy Hale's mother, and so this commission was rejected. It was eventually, purchased by someone else. But when Frida got home from this trip in 1939, Diego asked for a divorce. We're not entirely sure why. He was probably pressured by one of his lovers, but Kahlo refused any alimony. And over the next year, she made some of her most ambitious paintings because for the first time, she was painting to support herself. So this is, I believe, her very largest work. It is a life-sized painting of the two Fridas, the one Diego used to love and the one he no longer loves. And these are very much coded racially. The one Diego used to love is wearing that Tijuana costume and is darker skinned. The one he no longer loves is wearing a European, lacy Victorian gown. But both of them are depicted with their hearts exposed, and in this one's hand is a miniature portrait of Diego, which is attached to an artery that runs around Frida's arm into this heart, and then across over to the exposed heart that he no longer loves, and then finally down to where this Frida is holding a forceps, but it's not working. She's still bleeding to death. And the blood drips onto her white gown, where the blood drops wittily rhyme with the red flowers of the embroidery of that conventional pattern. It's a devastating double self-portrait. Frida cut her hair off in her grief and made this self-portrait with cropped hair with the lyrics of a popular song about how, I know you only loved me for my hair, and now that it's gone, you don't love me anymore. But in this year, she made some of her finest self-portraits. And she would paint these and then send them for friends that she knew could afford them and ask for a donation. That was how she was, keeping afloat. This self-portrait shows her wearing not a crown of thorns, but a necklace of thorns, evoking Christ's passion, his torture before his execution. And hanging from those thorns is a dead hummingbird, a symbol of lost love in Aztec lore, in Mexican culture. There are two animals at her shoulders, one a monkey, one of those stand-ins for the child she would never have with Diego, but then also the black cat, which is a somewhat more sinister figure, and yet above her head are butterflies that emerge from chrysalises, symbolic in her belief in reincarnation, life after death. So she's making these very fine works, and her style, her abilities have really improved over the past decade or so that she has been painting seriously. In this self-portrait, she wears the earring that Picasso gave her in Paris. In this one, she has taken all of those discarded tresses and turned them into a pretzel-like braid atop her head that sort of visually complements the pre-Columbian necklace that she's wearing. And in another pair of portraits, she would paint those monkeys. Those surrogate children that she surrounded herself with, that stood in for absent children. Well, at the end of 1940, Diego and Frida remarried. Neither of them had done well during their year of divorce. Diego lost 100 pounds, and his doctors ordered him to be re-inflated. And a close friend of both of them, a doctor in San Francisco, wrote to Frida, encouraging her to consider reuniting with him, writing, quote, "Diego loves you very much, and you love him. It is also the case, and you know it better than I, that besides you, he has two great loves. One painting. Two women in general. He has never been nor ever will be monogamous, end quote. And he went on to say that if she could accept him under those terms, that they were stronger as a couple than they were separately. So indeed, they reunite. But she continues to have recurring periods of depression, of thinking about death, which she visualizes here by placing a skull and crossbones right in her forehead in this really beautiful self-portrait. Or in 1943, in her self-portrait as a Tewana, Diego on my mind, it is Diego who occupies that real estate of her forehead, above her eyebrows. And Diego is causing the fractures that we see that emanate from the flowers that seem to crack through her veil, her costume, but that also remind us of the roots reaching down in the soil that we have seen her depict in various paintings. And those roots are a motif that she begins to explore more bloodily, perhaps, in works like Roots from 1943 as well. So in these years, Diego was building a museum in a region of the greater Mexico City area called Anahuacalli that has this characteristic terrain that looks furrowed. And she shows herself lying on the ground on this characteristic patch of broken earth, Anahuacalli earth, and she is feeding vines that bleed into the soil, nourishing the soil that come from this void in her chest. And it's an image that is reminiscent of an early work by Rivera. The blood of the revolutionary martyrs fertilizes the soil, except that the martyrs are already dead and Frida is still alive. The following year, she paints the broken column, again against that ravaged landscape. Here, instead of a void in her chest, she substitutes her broken spinal column with a broken ionic column from classical architecture. And she shows herself naked except for the brace she was forced to wear to keep herself upright. And she shows us with nails visually driven into her body, she shows us her pain. So her headaches and the pain that radiates down this arm and the pain that is particularly prominent around this hip and this leg, the broken right leg, spreading down to her foot. So from this point forward, her art is as much about physical pain as it is about emotional pain. But she always trusted that the next treatment would make her better. The next surgery would make her better. So she painted this on the eve of yet another back surgery. Tree of Hope, Stand Firm was the title of a popular song, and she imagines herself able to fling away the hated brace and walk unaided. It would never happen. So she paints the wounded deer in 1946. The subject is derived from a poem by a colonial era poet, a 17th century Spanish woman named a nun named Sor Juana de la Cruz. It's Kahlo herself as this wounded stag. It's her own pain. It's this broken branch, the arrows that pierce her, but also the hope of redemption and reincarnation. She would paint the love embrace of the universe. Mexico, me, and Senor Xolatl, their little dog, all being held by the universe, and then by Mexico, and then Diego held like a baby. It's a Pietà, or a Madonna and child, with Frida as the Madonna and Diego with a third eye as the child. Diego, who continues to cause her grief. Here, her loose hair seems to be strangling her, but Diego, who is on her mind, and Diego, whom she believes has these, the wisdom of the third eye, but you can see she's crying in this self-portrait. And even coconuts cry in Kahlo's work. Which is actually a very witty pun. Coconut tears sounds a lot, the word for coconut sounds a lot like the word for crocodile in Spanish. And so crocodile tears are here coconut tears. But she's painting still lives again because she's in the hospital for a lot of 1951. And her friends are bringing still lifes to her bedside for her to paint them. She even painted the plaster corsets that she was forced to wear, that kept her torso upright in these last years of her life. And again, those still lives express pain. Here, the flag, this little toothpick flag that goes through the skin of that mango, reminds us of the streetcar railing going through her body, piercing her, the first of those injuries. And she would tell a friend around this period that she had been in 2 serious accidents in her life. The first one was that streetcar accident. The second was Diego. When it was too hard for her to handle oil paints, she switched to gouache and watercolor, water-based mediums, and she filled pages and pages of her journal with poetry, with dense imagery, with a combination of word and picture, expressing her hopes, her griefs, her pain. She would spend most of 1953 in the Hospital de la Raza in Mexico City, but so would Diego, because he was painting his last great mural there, The History of Medicine in Mexico, which includes that pre-Columbian statue, or supposedly pre-Columbian forgery of the squatting woman giving birth. On the left, modern medicine; on the right, ancient medicine. And Diego would, pay visits to Frida when he was not working. Eventually, she had to have that damaged right leg amputated below the knee. And she made this very moving page in her sketchbook that she inscribes, "Feet, what do I want them for when I have wings to fly?" But she really went downhill from the amputation, and she died at the age of just 47 in 1954, possibly of a deliberate overdose of her pain medication. Now, Diego and Frida had a marriage I think most of us would not have wanted to be a part of, but however unconventional it may have been, they did support one another's art unconditionally. And he was the most important human being in the world to her. And I think she was to him as well. She called him the greatest painter that Mexico had produced since pre-Columbian times. He called her, quote, "the greatest proof of the Renaissance of the art of Mexico. In the panorama of Mexican painting of the last 20 years, the work of Frida Kahlo shines like a diamond in the midst of many inferior jewels," end quote. And that is a good description of Frida's work, like a diamond, hard and precise, and pitiless. But in Frida's case, always honest, here showing herself dreaming of death, of that Dia de los Muertos figure that's going to be exploded. And Frida continues to be an inspiration to modern Mexicans who are making their Dia de los Muertos altars, to women all over the world who have used creativity as a way to move through physical and psychological suffering. Kahlo was a self-taught artist, but she was never a naive artist. She knew precisely what she was doing with her complicated symbolism, and the way that she used her work as a distraction, a sublimation from her own pain, her sorrows, her regrets. And given the physical pain that she was in for her entire adult life, every single painting Kahlo made was an act of courage. And that fact continues to resonate today. We see the courage, we admire it, and we try to take a little of it for ourselves. Thank you. So are there questions or images you'd like a second look at?
This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
The narrative around Frida is about so much about pain, intensely personal work, passion. Is there any counter narrative out there about her being just a human being eating frijoles and, you know, talking to her grandma or something like that? Because she's so larger than life, and she exposes herself so much in her paintings that you kind of wonder, is there just a regular person in there, or was she always that grand?
Was she always?
that you know, that how do you say it, that big, that metaphoric.
Was she always that persona? Is
That
maybe a way
persona,
of
yeah.
asking it.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
she paints herself again and again and again, and maybe her art is the most self-exposing work of the 20th century, but maybe it is a mask that she is painting again and again and again. And there are numerous accounts written by people who knew her. For instance, there's a cookbook, Frida's Feasts, written by one of Diego's daughters with his previous wife, Lupe Marin. And she talks about Frida as a cook. Frida, who would make these absolutely gorgeous vegetarian meals for Diego when his doctor told him to, cut out all the pork. And so she would make him lunch boxes that she decorated with flowers, and they were the most beautiful lunches that you can possibly imagine, and the joy of holidays at their house and how they would go all out and be cooking for a couple of days. And so that I think is a more human aspect of her, that is less tied up with the suffering, the pain, the trauma. I mean, she had trauma. And that was one of the prime reasons that she painted, that it was a way for her to work through that trauma. But there is a less dramatic Frida there as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
My question is not necessarily about Frida, but about you,
Okay.
and about what caused you to get in such depth of knowledge of her life and the detail of her art.
I learned about Frida Kahlo in the 1980s, and at some point came across the Hayden Herrera biography of her, which is now probably 30 years old, but it's still a really solid work of scholarship that is a wonderful introduction to Frida, to her relationships, to her world. Since then, there have been many other things published about her. But in the 80s and 90s, she was just being rediscovered by a new, a new group of feminist artists, art historians. She was not yet the sort of cultural behemoth that she is nowadays. And that biography really just entranced me. Because I'd sort of thought that her art was a little self-involved, which of course it is, but then when you learn more about her, you understand how she's using her own image, how important that is in her own healing process, really. I myself am not a painter, and I'm not someone who is autobiographical in this way, but I do love delving into the lives of particularly female artists, and I like delving into female artists who are less well known. Frida's not one of them anymore, but I think she merits our attention.
Okay, just speak really loud and then we'll repeat it.
Thank you. Yes.
Did everybody hear that? She said she was interested in the possibility that Frida had committed suicide.
Well, she did die of an overdose of pain medication. And whether it was accidental or deliberate is not known. And it was a sort of situation where this was after the amputation, and she was having phantom, the pain didn't go away. Even though the leg went away, the pain didn't go away. And so she was taking more and more pain medication. I mean, it's a little like Prince, or these tremendous, talented people who are self-medicating, and sometimes they take too much. Did she mean to or not? She probably didn't mean to, but she was in a lot of misery. It was, losing her leg was really hard on her. I think it would be hard on anybody to lose a part of your body, but it, and then medically, it just, she was not in good physical shape at that time. So, I don't know. I don't think anyone can know, but certainly she did have a tremendous zest for life.
The painting of Frida giving birth to herself was so fascinating to me. And it's something that was like, it's so graphic, but feels very true to me. And like, that was my initial impression, was like, wow, that's accurate. I was wondering if you would ever consider doing like a talk about the depiction of childhood in art, because you said it was very unusual from a Western art canon. But it's so fascinating to me to think that, like, I remember after my daughter was born, my initial thought was like, wow, every person ever was born?
And honestly, I have never seen this. I have given birth, but I was, my view was different than this view. I've never been in the room when someone else gave birth. There is one other example that I can think of in the whole history of art, and it is in the Musée d'Orsay, and it is carved on a bed by a male artist, one of the Nabi artists, and I can't remember the name of the artist, but I suspect if you Googled Nabi, N-A-B-I, they called themselves prophets, bed childbirth, it would come up. Google would give you the image. But that is the only other image that I can think of a woman actually in the midst of giving birth. Male artists have shied away from this, and female artists seem to as well. And probably there are some feminist artists from the 1970s and onward who have taken on this subject matter. An artist named Mary Kelly did a conceptual art piece that is all about, how many ounces of formula she gave her child every day, and the nursing, the burping, the whole thing. But as far as images of actual childbirth, there are very few, and there aren't very many images of even pregnant women in the Western canon, because that was seen as sort of unsightly. So I'd have to think about, certainly childhood. There's lots of images of childhood, but childbirth, not so much. Yeah. Oh, so the head above the bed is the Virgin of Sorrows. And it was a traditional, almost an icon in Mexican households. You would have either a crucifixion or a weeping Madonna, or maybe a Madonna and child above your bed. But usually it's one of those painful Christian images. Whether it is also her mother and or her is something that we could speculate. This weeping virgin at the head of the bed, then sort of standing in for the missing features of her mother who has just passed away. Absolutely, it probably does also have that meaning, but it is, first and foremost, it is a Virgin of Sorrows. So there was a question right here.
I was just going to add to the childbirth comment. I'm also very interested in childbirth in art history, and I'm reading a book right now by Hetty Judah called Acts of Creation, and it is so good. It's, do you know
I
Hetty
don't
Judah?
know it.
You would probably really enjoy it.
Okay.
And so would you. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, Hetty Judah, Acts of Creation. Okay, that may be a seed for a future talk.
Hi, Rebecca. I'm curious about Frida Kahlo's techniques. And for example, do you know if she drew the images, say on pencil or whatever, before she did them, or did she just go straight to the canvas or the metal or whatever? And then her colors are so intriguing. I know it says a lot of them are oil, but for example, do you know anything about, did she use natural sources, dyes, that kind of thing?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. And I have to admit, I do not know a lot about Frida's materials, about her technique. She's definitely using oil paints. And in this period, there are commercially available oil paints, although some artists were still, mixing and making their own. In the 40s, early 40s, Andrew Wyeth is making his own tempera in the United States with egg yolks and pigments. So she certainly could have been mixing her own paints. I don't know if she's mixing her own paint. She certainly has a sort of earthy palette that you could achieve through through mixing natural pigments and so forth. But I don't know. I was going to say I suspect she used commercially prepared paints, but I honestly don't know. It would be an interesting question for Diego as well, because he could have assistants grinding paint. Certainly he has assistants plastering walls for him. That would be an interesting thing to find out. So I don't know. Yeah, over here. Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting question. Her family was, her father had a photography studio. They were educated, or at least her father was educated. Her mother less so, and her mother was more Christian. She also made this painting. Her father had Jewish blood as well. And she made this painting shortly after the, what they call the Nuremberg laws, the Nazis' anti-Jewish legislation as well. And that forbid interracial marriage as well, which her parents sort of were. And so I think she wants to emphasize her mixedness, that she has both European culture and native blood. And she emphasizes that again in that painting of the Frida Diego used to love and the Frida and the one he doesn't love anymore. But I think she does want that, the non-purity of her bloodline to be evident in this. So her father was educated and spoke German, and I think her father was even born in Germany and emigrated, either that or her grandparents emigrated to Mexico. And I think she spoke German. And she followed the press. She followed what was happening in Europe very closely. And it dismayed her a lot. So she grew up in a cultured household, but they weren't wealthy. Her father was always sort of, on the verge of, bankruptcy. He wasn't making a lot. I did see an exhibit, maybe in Portland a few years ago, where they had some of his photographs in addition to her paintings and paintings by Diego and other people from that era. And it was the first time I'd ever seen his photographs. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to say that again in the mic?
Yes, a tattoo on one's forehead is a bad idea. Oh, a little girl at that show in Portland, which included the portrait of Frida with Diego on her mind, wondered why she had gotten a tattoo of Diego on her forehead. So I'm going to end there.
Thank you so
I
much.
Catch the
Thank you.
3:45 ferry. So thank you all.